This video is one in the series on the book How to Be Anti-Racist by Ibram Kendi. And this video focuses on chapter 9. I'm Karen Thomas Brown. I'm a professor of education in the College of Education, Health and Human Services. My research area is predominantly on immigration studies, focused on diversity, equity, inclusion, and issues of social justice for immigrants, as well as in education for various social justice issues. Now, I've already done one video on chapter 7 that talks about cultural racism, and now I'm focused on color racism. This video has several links. I hope they all work. If they don't, the slideshow is available and you can click on the links there as well. So I start out with what Kendi says about who a racist is, who an anti-racist is, and who an assimilationist is. When we talk about color racism from chapter 9, we're pretty much saying, and what Kendi's pretty much saying is that if you subscribe to color racism, which is light skin versus dark skin people, then you also subscribe to the notion of racism, because this is just as damaging, because it reaps disadvantage on people of darker skin while giving more advantages to people of lighter skin. And those advantages are predominantly based on the shade of one's skin, as opposed to any intellectual capacity, any intellectual abilities, or hard work, or anything of the sort. And so color racism, it's something that one has to pay attention to, just as one pays attention to black versus white racism. So ethnicity racism, or racism based on race, literally. So color racism, I guess, in Kendi's eyes, is not just a matter of one race versus another, but it also some internal dynamics that creates disparities. I start this slide out with a couple of questions, just like I did in my previous chapter, to talk about like what are the questions I want you to focus on as you read through this chapter. And it's, what is colorism? How is colorism including preferences for particular skin, eye color, hair texture, facial features reflected in today's beauty standards? And what steps can we take to build and support a culture that celebrates natural beauty? And let me start out by saying that notions of color racism is very, very controversial, especially in the black community, because it calls out some popular people for things like skin bleaching or showing preferences for a particular skin color versus another. Here are some examples, the ones I'm going to focus on. For instance, Lil' Kim, this is what she looked like, this is what she looks like now. Or we can look at this woman here and the damage that has been done to her skin from skin bleaching. We can look at this one here, what she looks like before and what she looks like after. And there are a bunch of other people that I'm sure you recognize in these images who have been accused in one way or another of bleaching their skin. And this is one of the damaging outcomes of color racism. So I can begin with my own personal experience, which is one of the reasons I chose this topic. I grew up in the Caribbean, in Jamaica, and one of the things that you'll hear a lot in the Caribbean is, if you have a household, there's a pretty good chance there will be a super dark kid and there'll be a super light kid born to the same parent. And that's a product of slavery and the sexual assaults on women of color, black women, black slaves, that led to varying shades over multiple generations, and still having some of that DNA embedded, where some kids come out super dark and some come out super light. In my particular experience, I was the dark skinned kid in my family, and growing up, some of the things I was told was, Karen, don't play outside in the sun, you can't afford to get any darker. Or I had super curly hair, like big curly hair, and it was referred to as good hair. And so they'll be like, at least you have pretty hair. And so it's almost like, because you're dark, you're automatically ugly. And if your hair is curly, then that's something that adds to your beauty. And these are the damaging statements that are said to children and to people of color a lot, but particularly to dark skinned people of color. For me, I've always been pretty confident in my skin color, so I would rebel as a child, and I ran tracks. That means I was outside in the sun all the time. And so I had what I refer to as my summer glow, which I absolutely loved. But others looked at and say, maybe if you stayed inside more, you'd be a little bit lighter. But I never wanted to be more lighter. Or when I decided that I'd had enough of people referring to my hair as pretty, while referring to my sister's hair as nappy. And so I had dreadlocks. And then I was told, why would you spoil your pretty hair? Because making your hair dreadlocks made you more African looking and therefore less pretty. And so these are some standards of beauty that is tied to skin color racism. So Kendi starts out his chapter by sort of identifying what we mean by light and dark. For light-skinned people, he refers to people who are able to pass as white, some of them, or they're accepted into lightness, or because of their biracial nature, they reap certain advantages. Whereas he looked at dark skinned people as being described as dark skinned, kinky haired, broad nose, thick lips, and he identifies it across multiple nationalities, races, and ethnicities. He also says to be anti racist is to move beyond this skin color line because of how harmful it is to dark skinned people. Now, as I was doing the research and getting ready to do this video, I came across this ad that I'm going to talk about. But as I'm talking about this ad, the notion of light versus dark has reaped disproportionate losses to dark-skinned people. Now, some of the things that have been said that causes this disparity, for instance, why do they think highly of themselves? This person said that. Or here, beautiful bodies are white bodies. Our darker skin makes you more animalistic and therefore better suited for as a field slave, or human mule, or the slaveholders who said the light-skinned women were smarter, kinder, and more beautiful. Or Stanhope, who said that the white man's hair is closer to perfection, thereby implying that the black man's hair is closer to imperfection, and imperfection is not good. I came across this, and this woman is a biracial light-skinned woman who is doing an ad for a bleaching cream. Bleaching creams became very popular in 1938 when hydroquinone and other chemicals that was used to remove the melanin from one's skin were discovered. And so this cream, Nadinola, was being advertised, and in the ad it says the nicest things happen to girls with light, bright complexions. And so it was essentially putting down dark-skinned women. And this is an old ad, but guess what? When I saw this ad, I went to my local Walmart and I went to a beauty supply store, and guess what I saw? Nadinola is a cream that is still sold today, perpetuating the notion that women should bleach their skins, or people rather who are darker skinned should bleach their skins. Now, there is this debate and sort of a versus rivalry between Marcus Garvey, the philosopher, and W.D. Du Bois, the philosopher. Du Bois opposed Marcus Garvey's view on skin color, and for the record, Marcus Garvey was the first philosopher that said dark-skinned people should see themselves as beautiful, that they were the descendants of kings and queens, and that they should embrace their skin color. He was the first to say it. Du Bois looked at Marcus Garvey's Pan-African views and his skin color views and said that it was just a Caribbean thing and it was something in Caribbean politics. And he never quite accepted it. And so I'll talk a little bit more about when Du Bois sort of changed this stance. But as Du Bois is busy rejecting Garvey's view, it is known that when slavery ended and when emancipation was granted and when black people were thrust into freedom, as Kendi puts it, and I pulled this quote out for you, he said that white people build walls to separate themselves from black people. But what a lot of people will fail to recognize is that light-skinned white black people built even higher walls to separate themselves from dark-skinned people because they did not want to be associated with the disadvantages and the stereotypes associated with dark skin. And it got to the point where by the 1920s and 30s, there were what we refer to as blue vein societies, which were communities of light-skinned black people who would exclude other blacks on the basis of how light they were and to what extent they were able to pass as white. And so a number of tests were used in these blue vein societies. The brown paper bag test, which is essentially saying if you're lighter than a brown paper bag, you pass. But if you're darker than a brown paper bag, you cannot pass for white and therefore unacceptable. The comb test, how nappy was your black hair? The door test and the pencil test. But these were used to bar black people, people of color, from churches and businesses and parties and organizations and even historically black colleges and universities. Now, Marcus Garvey, in his theory, kept saying that we needed, as Black people, to accept who we are. And he sort of packaged his presentation on the Universal Negro Improvement Association that had the Black Star liner that believed that maybe we should go and establish Black communities in Africa. And a lot of American theorists opposed those views. And so it wasn't until the 1930s when a lot of philosophers started realizing that maybe Garvey had something. Garvey was right. For instance, W.D. Du Bois, when he saw how the Scottsboro Boys were treated, and after Garvey had been deported back to Jamaica, that he started realizing that there was some merit to what Garvey talked about when he talked about color racism. And in fact, when the executive secretary for the NAACP, a son of two biracial persons, Walter White, started purporting certain assimilationist views that said light-skinned people were better and the mixed person was better than the unmixed, the straight Black person. That was when W.D. Du Bois sort of self-checked and went back to embracing some of the views put forward by Marcus Garvey. Now, I pulled this slide up because I really want you to understand that color racism is just as damaging as racism based on ethnicity and race. So the manifestation of within and between race disparities is pretty significant. It has impacts on prison sentence where dark-skinned people are more disproportionately treated harshly. School suspensions, dark children, Black children, are more likely to be expelled, suspended, and given harsher punishment. Parenting, light-skinned children are known to receive better parenting. Dating, dark-skinned women have long lamented the unavailability of men, even Black men, to dating dark-skinned women. And they're stereotyped derogatorily, not because of any pattern of behavior, but simply because of the shade of their skin. Now, one very popular actress, which is featured in the article here, said that throughout my life, being dark has often been associated with being less desirable. And in the article, she says this, and the article title says it all: why dark-skinned Black girls like me aren't getting married. And so we can also look at the statistics, which I've provided here in the slide for you, that talks a lot about the disadvantages that comes from simply racism based on light skin versus dark skin. Now, some of the disadvantages also perpetuate itself in the stereotypes. For instance, when we think about an educated Black man, often we attribute it to a light-skinned Black man as opposed to the thousands and thousands of successful dark-skinned, academically educated Black men. Or when we think of Black achievement, we immediately attribute it to biracial people as opposed to Black people. Now, Black inferiority explains why light-skinned people were wealthier, healthier, and more powerful in the 1920s, and why today white people are wealthier, healthier, and more powerful. Now, I pulled this slide up because I wanted you to realize that it is so endemic that we sometimes don't even realize what's happening. This is a nursery rhyme that persisted as far as the 1960s and 70s. And it says, if you're Black, stay back. If you're brown, stick around. If you're yellow, you're mellow. And if you're white, you're all right. And the damage from skin color racism shows up in skin bleaching. And here's a Guardian article that you can read later on that talks about this woman's toxic relationship with skin bleaching, how she takes her skin tone from hair to hair to hair, and the mess that it wreaks and the havoc it wreaks on her skin, but why she does it, because of the associated advantages. And let's stop for a moment if you think this is only a Black people thing, because it's not. I found for you multiple documentaries, and I've linked you to all these YouTube videos from different places in the world that document and show the negative impact of skin bleaching. Now, skin lightening products, as I mentioned before, got its boost with the discovery of hydroquinone and other chemicals in 1938. And I mentioned that when I showed you the ad that I came across. Now, what I'm going to do really quickly is show you just the trailer from the ad that's produced on American soil about skin bleaching.
Black beauty is strength.
The human skin, now that's the body's largest organ. It's probably the most important bit of what makes us who we are.
It's organic, it's rich, it's powerful.
I want to audition for the lead, and they go, but the lead's written as black. And I was like, yeah.
I like light skin because it's making me more prettier.
Growing up, I wanted to be every shade other than the shade that I am. I would wear makeup that would make me look lighter. I would use steroids, and what it did, it faded your skin.
Bobrisky is now rich, like I have money because I sell cream, and I make more money from my cream business because I sell the cream all over the world.
At the point where I was bleaching my skin, I struggled so bad with accepting who I was. I felt like I was just, I don't know, in somebody else's body.
She says she's dating someone, and that person likes fair persons.
The complexion doesn't make you a better person at all. Complexion has nothing to do with beauty. The world will love you for who you are, not your complexion.
When you use bleaching cream, give you dark knuckles.
Without enough knowledge or not taking enough precautions while using those products, there has been grave damage that's occurred onto the skins.
My black is.
So please feel free to watch the others. They are very powerful, and they talk about the damage that comes, and it starts with the psychological damage of being told you're less than simply because your shade is darker. So we see how this is associated with racism. And if you think this is something for somewhere else in the world or something that happens back in the day and not today, here are a couple of quotes that I pulled from Kendi's book. In 2007, Don Imus on MSNBC was he was commentating on a women's basketball game between two Black teams, one from Rutgers University and one from Tennessee, and he referred to the women on the Rutgers side as those nappy-headed hoes, and he referred to the ones on the Tennessee side as all look cute because they were light versus dark. And that's how it's endemic, that it's in your psyche that you would diminish a woman playing a game to the point of calling her a whore or a prostitute simply because she was darker skinned. We can talk about prominent features in people in society who have bleached their skins. There's Michael Jackson, there's Sammy Sosa, there's Little Kim, and these are just some of the people mentioned in Kendi's book. He also talks about the fact that the skin bleaching industry globally is $1 billion industry. He talks about how we pit against each other. So it's the dark-skinned jigaboos versus the light-skinned wannabes, or the lighter the skin, the lighter the sentence. And then he gave this particular quote, which was just absolutely heartbreaking, of a 2014 casting call where the women were categorized A to D based on how dark their skin were. And here's the thing. A trained actress, somebody who went to college, somebody who's doing this for a living, the roles she's given to portray is dependent on whether or not she's medium to dark skin versus whether or not she's light skinned. And so we see it over and over in our society and the negativity associated with it. I also pulled this article as a part of my research for this chapter, and the article is featured in The Guardian, and it's written by Angela Davis, a prolific anti-racist, and she came to fame, as it were, in the 1970s on the Civil Rights March because of her fro. And yes, she was associated with the Black Panthers, but she talks in this article about how it doesn't matter. It's like a double-edged sword. If you bleach your skin and you relax your hair by putting chemicals in it to make it straighter, then you don't love yourself enough. Then you're not black enough. Then why don't you embrace your natural hair? Or if you embrace your froze and you let your kinks stretch, and you keep your regular tone, your natural tone, then the criticism is you're not pretty enough. Or do you speak African? I remember even myself being asked once, do I speak Jamaican? So, or you're too black. You need to be a little bit whiter. Why? Because we subscribe to this white standard of beauty. And so Kendi gave this really honest story of himself wearing colored contacts as a way of being black, but yet being seen as black, but being seen as a little bit less black, because he didn't have the stereotypical dark brown or black looking eyes. He wanted the almost white eyes. And he talks about comparing himself to his friend Clarence, who had lighter eyes and had won the genetic lottery, as it were, in the race. And then once he came to certain consciousness, he talks about the shame he felt when he was training to look more white. And so he asked himself the question, why do I think lighter eyes would be more attractive on me? He also talked a little bit about his light-skinned girlfriend in college and how people thought he was crazy when he broke up with her. Now, Kendi also goes into the notion of black hair and some of the things that are descriptors rather that we hear when we talk about black hair is like cornrows, braids, dreadlocks, froze. And this first four, a lot of black women will tell you that if you're going for a job interview or going into work, these are the hairstyles that are seen as a little less professional because they're not relaxed. In other words, you've not put the chemicals on it to make it look as white as possible. And it's interesting that today we're still having these conversations. In the military, there are standards, written standards about a black woman's hair and how a woman has to have a certain dimensions in between her cornrows for it to be acceptable, or how she has to wear her hair, so she can't wear a lot of these hairstyles as freely. And that happens throughout industry as well. And so I'm going to click on this link. I hope it works. And it's a documentary narrated and partially written by Chris Rock, and it's produced by HBO. And it talks a little bit about black hair. Hopefully I can skip
Your
over
summer
this
salad
ad
can help kids.
really
Every
quickly.
salad dressing
Sometimes the
sold
video
this
pops
summer
up with the
helps
ad,
kids with
sometimes it
serious.
doesn't. So let's see if we can get to it. No, it's not going to do it for us today, but it's there, and it's a documentary that sort of charts what happened with black hair and just how it's $1 million industry. Now, to wrap up, Kendi talks about inverted color hierarchy, and it does exclude dark-skinned people from light-skinned circles and how it excludes light-skinned people from being black enough. But I looked at it as also a defense mechanism where dark-skinned people have been perpetually disadvantaged, and so they have embraced their blackness, but in doing so they've also rejected other people of color who are not as dark as they are. So they're alienating actions, they're name calling, like light, bright, damn near white, or red boned, or are you black enough? And then they use that to talk about the one drop rule. And if you're talking anything about color racism, the one drop rule has to be included. Now, in the one drop rule, it's the notion of racial purity. Kendi says it's a mirage, but mirage or not, it happens in the black community, where they say if you have one drop of black blood, you're not white enough. But what it does is that it bars light-skinned people from whiteness. But the 2-drop rule bars light-skinned people from blackness. And the 3-drop rule that Kendi kind of coins bars dark-skinned people from pure lightness. He closes off this chapter by saying to be anti-racist is to diversity or diversify, sorry, our standards of beauty, like our standards of culture or intelligence, to see beauty equally in all skin colors, broad, thin nose, kinky or straight hair, light or dark eyes. To be anti-racist is to build and live in a beauty culture that accentuates instead of erases our natural beauty.